There's just something about like that you can go anywhere in your imagination and do anything, and so I sort of like that, and I've always liked that ever since being a kid. So it's my most favorite genre, and yeah, I guess I'm just a hopeless optimist.
In den 90ern hatten die Weltraumspiele.
In the 90s, space games had a peak in popularity, and then suddenly disappeared. I think that technology was the reason for that.
Die Ursache dahinter.
Und es war so schade, weil ich das Genre so geliebt.
It really was a pity, because I enjoyed this genre so much, and suddenly there was nothing. It was a very sad moment for me.
Ein sehr, sehr trauriger Moment.
Especially at the end of the 90s and during the early 2000s. I'm convinced that it had to do with the rise of the ego shooters.
And that was just what people were excited about at the time. Maybe there was something about them that you couldn't really do in space, that was interesting to people.
Ja, also ich weiß nicht, ob es unbedingt damit.
I'm not sure if it had anything to do with that. I just think it was a refocusing on other settings that worked at the time. But that's something for a cultural historian to answer what really happened back then.
Was da wirklich passiert ist.
Michael Schade, die Everspace machen.
With Michael Schade and the guys that make Everspace, we sit together and just talk about what we do. It's not like we're working against each other. The industry is very small and tight-knit. It's almost like a school trip. Because of events like these, it's not unusual to see certain people from the business more than your friends.
I think it's the idea that you can go anywhere, and it's like there's an optimism to space, like the fact that the universe is boundless and the possibilities are endless.
The space games genre, that I personally love so much, is coming back.
Back in 2006, 2007, I started the project Cologne Game Lab. Meanwhile, the name of the university changed to Technical University Cologne, and we're part of the Faculty for Cultural Sciences.
Eigentlich mein Hauptanliegen ist es, zu vermitteln, wie man vernetzt denkt.
Basically my main goal is to teach connected thinking. What they primarily do here is to develop video games. But of course we have many idols and designs we refer to. Deliberately or maybe even subconsciously.
Bildern und Gestaltungsquellen, auf die wir uns alle beziehen, bewusst oder unbewusst. Im Jahrgang 1965.
I was born in 1965, and one of my first experiences with media that I can remember was the moon landing in 1969. When Neil Armstrong made his first step on the moon, I was sitting on the scratchy couch in our living room with my parents who'd woken me up.
Zusammen mit meinen Eltern, die mich geweckt hatten. Für mich sind Spiele.
To me, games are the perfect combination of all the different types of media, which are important to me.
Und teuer sind. Ich habe angefangen
I started with Pong and really got into arcade games. At the time, arcade machines were in theaters. So that meant that when I went to the theaters on Saturdays, I got there an hour early to spend my pocket money on arcade games before the movie.
Ausgegeben hat, in die Arcade-Automaten reingesteckt. Da ich aus einem medial geprägten Elternhaus.
I grew up in a very media-influenced home, which led to me always having a general interest for this genre and embracing it.
Natürlich ganz stark verankert haben und auch mein persönliches Interesse da manifestiert.
Even though I'm not a film scholar, I would like to mention George Méliès and his movie A Trip to the Moon from 1902. He introduced the science fiction genre to the film industry, and used many elements that we still can find in movies and video games today. To me, he is the main person determining the style we have today.
Eigentlich der Stilbestimmende ist. Im Weiteren.
In addition, Star Trek aired in the 70s. I remember, it was virtually impossible as a child to go to school on Mondays if you hadn't seen Star Trek on the weekend. Space travel. Spaceships grew to be very popular at the time.
Das heißt also Space Travel, der Weltraum, Raumschiffe, das war ganz wichtig. Ich denke mal, was natürlich eben sehr spezifisch ist für Weltraumspiele, ist, dass dieser
I think what's so special about space games is that space is infinite. Earth, on the other hand, has its limits. Any setting on Earth or on a fictional planet has an end eventually. That's probably one of the main reasons for fans of this genre to play it. You can lose yourself in the vastness of space.
Dass ich mich in den Weiten des Universums verlieren kann, ne? Dazu kommt auch eben nochmal.
Another reason is the love for spacecrafts. They have a certain attraction to them. Because to travel over these great distances, you need fictional technology like the wormholes in Eve, or special propulsion engines.
Ich brauche irgendwelche speziellen Antriebe. Also es gibt auch so eine Art von fiktiver Technologieliebe, die dazugehört.
So there also is a love for fictional technology, explaining how to voyage through space. Just the large scale that you have in space lets us humans seem even smaller. That's another aspect involved in this genre.
Das habe ich natürlich nur im Weltraum.
Weltraum hat mich schon immer fasziniert, schon als Kind.
I've always been fascinated with space. As a child, I was a big fan of the TV series Battlestar Galactica.
Faszinierend fand, dass
To me, it was fascinating how you could explore unknown territory and experience things no man has ever experienced before, like in Star Trek.
Und das ist, finde ich, auch was das Science-Fiction-Genre von allen anderen Genres.
That's what differentiates the science fiction genre from every other genre. In my opinion, it has so much more room for creative ideas and fantasy. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Faszinierendere Sachen machen als in allen anderen Genres, finde ich. Und das macht es für mich so toll. Das Tolle an der
What we all have in common working in a game magazine is our love for video games. We're working on a million things involving games. Of course the job can be stressful, but most important and rewarding for us is the passion for video games.
unglaublich wichtig ist. Es ist schön, dieses Thema halt beruflich betreuen zu können, was uns als Team.
It's great working with video games professionally. What connects us as a team is our passion for video games. We talk about games most of the day. And we also play together.
Gerade in meinem Beruf oder im Prinzip überhaupt, wenn man in dieser Branche.
You definitely need a passion for video games working in this business. At least when you're not paper pushing all day, and I still have that. If I would ever lose my passion for video games, I don't think I could continue doing this job. But I doubt that will happen.
Ich glaube aber nicht, dass das irgendwann passiert.
Wir wollen ein bisschen erzählen, wie die Woche lief für uns.
We want to talk about how the week has been for us, and which title positively surprised us the most. We're playing the biggest one live here.
Den größten sehen wir hier jetzt gerade, den spielen wir auch live.
Correct. Zero AD, a weird little indie game.
Ich finde immer, was ein Spiel für mich ausmacht.
To me, the most important aspect of a game is immersion, meaning how it can pull you into a universe, but especially when you experience unforgettable moments. Moments where you'll say to yourself, I'll never forget that. I've had such moments a long time ago that I won't ever forget. And of course, some of those moments were within space games.
Auch Momente aus Weltraumspielen, wo ich einfach niemals vergessen werde, wie das damals war. Dass Deutschland auch historisch eher ein Land war, in dem sich ja zum Beispiel...
I don't know why, but Germany has always been a country with many PC users.
Aber man sieht es auch im Vergleich mit anderen Ländern.
I think the difference might be, compared to countries with more console players, that Germans love to tinker. Maybe it's a kind of a do-it-yourself mentality in regards to that platform.
Da habe ich was Eigenes, mit dem ich sehr viel selber machen kann, Mentalität. So ein bisschen der Schrebergarten der Technik ist der PC für mich.
The games we have today emerged from the basic space games back then, which ran in data centers.
Uni-Rechnern gab. Eigentlich das prägende Spiel oder der prägende Spross dieser ganzen...
The most popular space game at the time was Star Raiders, which was released for the Atari 8-bit in the late 1970s. It's basically the first flight simulator in space and was an inspiration for games like Elite or Wing Commander.
Wurde für Elite zum Beispiel oder für Wing Commander. Und Star Raiders war insofern...
What's significant about Star Raiders was that it used many elements from the Star Trek, Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica franchises, but without a license.
Star Wars und Kampfstern Galactica, nur halt ohne Lizenz.
It's evident that that's where the game elements came from, the big and very successful franchises from the 60s and 70s. Those elements were then used in Star Raiders and later in other games. The most influential space game for the following generations of space video games,
which also had a very defining character for the whole genre, was Elite.
War Elite.
Der erste echte Vertreter des Sandbox.
The first game with the so-called sandbox gameplay. Basically that means that you can do whatever you want within the universe.
Du kannst dort tun, was du willst.
It featured different spacecrafts, navigation in space, star maps, etc.
Und Elite war damals sozusagen der Vorreiter.
Elite was a pioneer project allowing you to very freely express yourself. It was the first title to promote player expression, to enable the player to create a unique experience. And Elite was able to do that superbly.
So ein bisschen. Und Elite hat das damals halt mit Bravour einfach erlaubt.
Also das war ja schon sehr stark.
Even though it was visually very basic, the game gave the players room to express themselves.
Just the experience of such freedom within a game was fascinating.
Absolut faszinierend.
Ich gehöre schon zu denen, die Elite auf dem C64.
I played Elite on the C64. And I have a little brother who always wanted to play as well, so I used Lego bricks to build him his own controller and told him which fake buttons he had to push so that I could play without him bothering me.
Der mich in Ruhe gelassen hat zu spielen. Und ich habe auch an der Wand.
And I had a map of the elite universe on my wall that I had drawn, so I'd say that I'm an elite veteran.
Früh dabei war. Wenn man sich so ein bisschen historisch anguckt, dann gab es halt.
Looking back at Starflight and Star Control, those were more like space travel games, the first so-called space exploration adventures or RPGs.
Oder Space Exploration RPG genannt.
Ja, was dann natürlich.
Wing Commander was a milestone with massive impact. Back then, Chris Roberts, a young man from the US, who made a few role-playing games nobody remembers today, comes along and says that he wants to make a game that captures the fascination of the space battles from Star Wars.
Überbringt da Raumschlachten in Star Wars. Und er hat das geschafft. Ja?
And he did it. Chris Roberts shaped the term space opera.
Space Opera geprägt, der Weltraumoper. Also das war wirklich ein...
That was a game with massive influence, not just in the space game genre, but the whole game history.
Und dann Privateer war ja eins der Spiele, die dann quasi...
Privateer combined the setting and feeling of Wing Commander with the freedom of an open world by making your own decisions.
Welt und selber Entscheidungen treffen. Auch total spannend.
Then Freelancer appeared. If you look at it, there are space travel games, like ours, and simulations like Privateer, Privateer 2 and Freelancer. But after that, not much more for a very long time.
Dann gab es ja das Freelancer und dann gab es irgendwie erstmal ganz lange gar nichts gefühlt.
I was very sad that there weren't any further space game titles after the release of Freelancer. Freelancer was the last popular space game to be published. Announced fairly early, it had a long development phase with many different changes to the game, and was supposed to have much more content initially, but that was greatly reduced. Still, it was a great game. I remember thinking, I want more of this, or at least an add-on, so that I can explore this universe more. But then, nothing.
Und dann passierte einfach nichts mehr.
Delta One, we're making our torpedo run at the station. Over. Good to see you guys. Let's finish them off. Torpedoes away. Great shot, Delta Leader. Our pleasure, Gamma 6. We couldn't have done it without you.
Eines der Spiele, was so ein bisschen dieses Ende des Genres schon eingeläutet hat.
One of the harbingers of the ending era was Free Space 2. Which to me was an incredibly great game because of the large-scale space battles and huge spaceships that used big energy beams to cut each other to pieces. I remember playing the game and just thinking, wow, this is it. How can anyone not like this?
Weltraumspiele aussehen. Jetzt muss es doch jeder kapieren.
Check your sex.
And it is one of the commercially worst titles ever made.
Es war ein unglaublicher kommerzieller Flop.
We vanquished the Shivans in the Great War, but the hard questions remain. How would we confront the threat of future invasion?
Für das Ende des Weltraumgenres.
There are many theories why the space genre ceased. But I think many things just came together.
Ich kann nur sagen, was bei mir passiert ist, und vielleicht hat es ein bisschen was auch damit zu tun. Zu dem Zeitpunkt fingen die Echtzeitstrategiespiele.
I can only describe my experience, what might have something to do with it. At the time real-time strategy games emerged. Dune 2 was a sci-fi game while at the same time real-time strategy. I found it fascinating, that suddenly you had to make decisions with huge impact. And you had a great feeling of freedom. Until that point most games were very linear. Even Wing Commander was very linear. I always enjoyed it when I had a great deal of freedom within games. I could try this and that and optimize here and so on.
Zu spielen im Sinne von, ich versuche das zu optimieren oder wie auch immer.
Es ist zwar eine historische Korrelation, ne, in gewisser Weise, dass...
There is a certain historic correlation between the upcoming of real-time strategy and space games disappearing, but I don't think they cannibalized each other, because they have so little to do with one another.
...gegenseitig kannibalisiert haben, weil sie so wenig miteinander zu tun haben einfach.
Und als wirklich polygonal 3D-Grafik aufkam.
When polygonal graphics were first used in games, they didn't exactly look great. Before the 90s, if you wanted to create a 3D video game, due to the limited processing power, you had to set it in space, because you didn't have to render so much. With dedicated graphic cards arising, you could suddenly make first-person shooters, where you were able to experience a world from the perspective of your own character. They became so popular, that space games appeared uninteresting.
Man kann ja auch in Shootern, die einfach nur irgendwo auf Boden spielen,
all of a sudden it was possible to do much more exciting things with the environment. For example, a realistic jungle like in Crisis or cool entrance sequences like in Half-Life with short sequences of scientists dying in a funny way.
Wie in Half-Life, wo dann irgendwelche Forscher irgendwie dann lustig ums Leben kommen oder so. Das war einfach einerseits.
That seemed to be more than what space games could offer, since as a developer you had to do much more in a space game to create an interesting world. And at the same time, the genre itself might have appealed to more players, because they prefer a jungle over a cold space environment flying through pink fog. So yeah, I think that there's some truth to that.
Durch den ich fliegen muss. Also ich glaube schon, dass da was dahinter steckt.
Es ist ja nicht so, dass die Geschichten irgendwie in den 90ern auf einmal ausgegangen sind.
It's not like they ran out of stories during the 90s. I think that we still have much to learn and need to make use of the potential the space genre provides to tell real stories.
Um einfach mal richtige Geschichten zu erzählen.
Also eine wichtige Theorie ist, dass Publisher, die ja im Wesentlichen.
An important theory is that publishers, who had been, and always will be the boosters of the gaming industry, saw that space games could not fulfill their commercial expectations. Free Space 2 is a very prominent example for that. As a publisher, of course, you tell developers to prove that a space game will be successful. If that doesn't work out, instead make a shooter, because that always sells. That's one reason.
Dann ist uns das finanzielle Risiko zu hoch, dich dabei zu unterstützen, das zu machen. Und dann machen wir doch lieber Shooter, weil das verkauft sich immer. Und das ist eine Säule.
Another one might be that there never really was a popular space game for consoles.
Spiel gab für die Konsole. Zumindest kein prominentes.
I mean, I think there was a combination of things. So there was a transition from, there was PC gaming that was pretty strong, and then there was sort of a transition over to console gaming, and the consoles got sort of better with PS1, PS2, and then it moved over to sort of Xbox and that kind of stuff.
Aber es gab da nie so.
There never really was that space game for consoles. There were popular sci-fi video games like Halo on Xbox, but no space simulations.
Aber eben keine Weltraumsimulation.
And all the game publishers sort of shifted to the consoles and weren't really funding PC-centric games. And I think people sort of thought of a space game or a space sim as a PC game.
Diese beiden Sachen zusammen, einerseits
both issues, on one hand, publishers not willing to take a risk, and that with good reason. And on the other hand, the lack of a space game for the popular new platforms, respectively the new way of gaming on the couch with a gamepad, might have led to the genre dying out.
Zusammengespielt haben, dass es am Ende dann hieß, macht keiner mehr. Ja, Darkstar One kam damals ein bisschen aus dem Nichts. Das ist 2006 erschienen von einem deutschen Studio.
Darkstar One appeared out of nowhere. It was released in 2006 by a German studio named Ascaron, in a period where the space game genre was deemed dead. But Ascaron still did it and was very passionate about the development.
Mit Leidenschaft entwickelt, ihm eine schöne Story gegeben, eine ganz spannende Geschichte und auch ein bisschen ein offenes Universum, was man erkunden konnte.
They gave it a good story and an open universe that could be explored, even though it had a few of the same repetitive elements. They tried to counter the trend of space games vanishing. Of course, as a single small team from Germany, that seemed rather impossible. But at least they tried.
Jetzt als einzelner Entwickler noch dazu aus Deutschland nicht unbedingt aufhalten, aber sie haben es zumindest noch mal versucht.
Off to the stars.
Und ein anderes deutsches Studio, was sich lange dagegen aufgelehnt hat und bis heute auch.
And another German studio which resisted that trend and is still resisting.
From Germany. What's their name again? I can't remember.
Is Egosoft with their X series.
Über die Jahre kamen immer wieder Spiele raus und es ist aber
Over the years, new titles were released every now and then. Compared to the golden years in the 80s and 90s, the space game genre has had dull times.
in den 80ern natürlich schon durch ein Tal gegangen ist. Ich war lange bevor ich angefangen habe.
I've been a science fiction fan long before I started making computer games. I was addicted to reading Isaac Asimov and other sci-fi authors. That's definitely what inspired me.
Was mich also definitiv inspiriert hat. Ja, Science Fiction heißt ja eben Science Fiction. Der Teil hat mich immer begeistert und tut das bis heute. Es gehört auch immer so ein gewisser...
What I've really always loved about science fiction is the science part of it. There has to be a certain optimism. I really like that about science fiction games and space games in general. You can see sort of a vision, a bright future for humanity, unless of course it's dystopic. It's more different than to set a scenario in medieval times or to play a role-playing game. It's the future, not the past being portrayed.
Vielen Spielen gemacht wird oder Rollenspiele zu spielen. Das ist eben die Zukunft und nicht die Vergangenheit, die da dargestellt wird. Als die Serie entstand, waren wir ja nur ein reiner deutscher Entwickler und unsere Adventure sind leider nicht einmal...
When we created the X series, we were just a small German team developing adventure games for the German market. Unfortunately, they weren't even translated. It was different with X Beyond. We entered the English market, then in several other European countries, and gradually even the US market.
Anfang an eine große Ausnahme war immer Russland. Merkwürdigerweise haben Weltraumspiele wahrscheinlich da generell eine gute Aufnahme gehabt.
Interestingly enough, the Russian market was an exception and a great success. Space games just seemed to be very popular there. We even were on the Russian market before our game was released. It must have been bootlegged on a large scale, so we then published our sequels there to expand our markets. I think that space games have a good standing in Russia because of their historical background in space exploration, which is also why our games are very popular there.
Spielen insgesamt haben und deswegen sind unsere Spiele da auch sehr gut angekommen. Es hat immer Spieleentwickler gegeben, die jetzt geschaut haben, was ist der Trend dieses Jahr. Und
there have always been developers that analyze trends, and if we would have done the same, we probably wouldn't have continued making space games. Our philosophy is different. We just do our thing and hope that there will be a market for it.
Und ich bin eigentlich überzeugt, wenn es etwas Gutes ist, dann nimmt es der Markt auch an. Und unser Spiel hat sich da im Grunde deswegen...
I am convinced that if a game is good, it will turn out successful. And our game is successful because we included additional simulation, economic and construction elements. Those game elements work independently from the setting. They work in space, as well as in a Middle Ages scenario, but we move them into the sci-fi genre.
Setting, aber wir haben das eben in diese Science-Fiction-Umgebung bewegt. Mit was sind das jetzt, 20 Jahren Entwicklung in einer einzigen Serie.
Over the course of now 20 years in making one series, of course we have some experience with it. We dug deep into it, grew, and with time, attained a fan community. That's what's so special about our company. We interact with our fans and always take our last title and improve it, by implementing something new. That's what the X series is all about.
Das Weiterentwickeln, das immer wieder den letzten Titel nehmen und wieder was oben drauf setzen. Das ist eigentlich das, was die X-Serie ausmacht.
What I think is so fascinating about the space game genre is that it was never really gone. It just wasn't perceived as much.
An advantage of having a few years on the clock is that I've seen many things fade away and then reappear after a while. Especially when I compare it to the TV series format that has also been declared dead many times.
Die Serie tot gesagt hat, das ist ja auch schon oft passiert.
Some things get you done a lot and then kind of go away, and everybody gets excited about one thing and then it kind of goes away, and then everybody gets excited about it again, maybe later or whatever. As for the space genre, I'm sure it's the same as any other.
Und generell lastet diesem Weltraumgenre.
The space game genre generally has always had the image of being bad for business. It sounds good to a small target audience, but it doesn't sell well. Which is weird, because never before have there been more science fiction movies in the movie theaters than today. For instance, the Star Trek reboot, the Star Wars franchise, Guardians of the Galaxy, Passengers, Interstellar. So many that have to do with space. It is fascinating. And because of today's high-performance computing technology, whether you're making movies or games, you have the possibility to create interesting and appealing space settings, even for people who might not be a fan of sci-fi or space per se.
Science-Fiction oder Weltraumfan sind, haben da einen Spaß dran.
Der Weltraum war immer sexy.
Space has always been sexy. It depends on what you do. Science fiction itself is sexy. Showing the possible future is sexy. The gameplay mechanics are what's crucial. You have to think about what will work and what might not work as well.
Und was funktioniert da vielleicht nicht so gut?
I think for me it's less about the fact that they were set in space and more about the experience and the immersion that the game was delivering.
Du musst dir genau überlegen, was ist.
You have to think about what's really relevant. What makes it fun to play. That's the main challenge when creating a space game. Which elements are crucial? No matter if you're making a fast shooter like Us, a construction simulation, or an RPG. You have to focus on the core elements. And you have to ensure that what you are doing in the game is relevant for this genre. The greatest danger when creating a space game is to say that you have limitless possibilities. I can fight, I can trade, I can conquer planets. Any of those elements could be a game of their own. When including all of that in one game, you might have a whole bunch of features, but they'll probably lack depth, and you'll quickly notice that it's rather shallow. That's the danger of it. Unless you are Chris Roberts and you have a budget of over $100 million, and you can do anything you want.
Hi, I'm Chris Roberts. Ever since I saw Star Wars as a wide-eyed 8-year-old, I dreamt of being a hotshot pilot saving the galaxy or a lovable rogue making my way across the cosmos. And now, I'm ready to come back, and I'd like to show you something I've been working on.
I think people like sci-fi and space. I mean, they certainly do in movies, right? I mean, how many people went to go see the most recent Star Wars? So I think given the right thing and presented in a way that's relatable to people, science fiction, space game can be as big as anything.
Was war das doch damals?
Remember the good old days with Wing Commander, Freelancer, Privateer, and all the other space sims? Too bad they disappeared. But did they really disappear? Or have they just not yet reappeared again? My guest today is the creator of Wing Commander, Chris Roberts, who will give us a taste of his new project.
Vorstellen wird. Chris, it's great having you here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's actually great to be here.
Dann stand plötzlich dieser Chris Roberts vor mir in der GameStar-Redaktion.
Suddenly Chris Roberts was standing in front of me. He was like, I want to make a space game again. Here's a demo clip. It's not the final look, but it's the direction we're heading. And I was just in awe. This is the guy who created the highly influential games of my childhood, and he's standing here and tells me, I'll bring it all back to you. At that moment I thought, this is it.
The largest crowdfunding campaign of all time. That is insane. And it shows that there's definitely a certain consciousness, or to put it in business terms, there is a demand.
Aus einer Konsumentenperspektive oder betriebswirtschaftlich gesprochen erstmal Nachfrage besteht.
The technology that we're seeing in the real world is accessing space a lot more, and it's a lot more in the public consciousness. It's relevant.
Not only am I a science fiction fan, but also a big science fan, and very excited about what is currently happening. I really hope that the ventures turn out successful and we'll be on Mars in the near future. That would also be good for the science fiction genre. That would inspire many young people again.
Leute inspiriert werden.
Also das Faszinierende auch daran, wie die Spielebranche heute im Allgemeinen funktioniert, ist ja, dass es auf der einen Seite...
What's so fascinating about how the game industry nowadays works is that on one hand there are very big and prominent projects, and on the other hand small ones, made by independent studios, who don't have the same resources. That's a good direction for the space game genre, because there are the big projects on one side, which hopefully will return and bring back what made them so great, just way better.
When looking at Star Citizen, it's obvious how high the quality is, which we could have never reached at the end of the 90s or in the early 2000s. Back then we didn't have iPhones. Today, cell phones have as much processing power as those silicon graphics workstations that I had to purchase for several 10K back in the 90s.
And on the other side, there are the small studios that don't have the capacities to make high-end titles. Nevertheless, they do things that manage to excite space game fans. Setting fascination peaks like that lies within the capability of the smaller studios. Within their area, of course. But still, that's what I'm hoping for the future of the space game genre.
Immer mehr auch was das Weltraumgenre angeht.
Das heißt, allein durch die
The gaming industry has totally new options through the course of technological progress alone.
Als Jugendlicher habe ich sehr gerne Galaga gespielt. Das ist so ein simples...
As a teenager, I like to play Galaga. It's a simple arcade game where you control a spaceship at the bottom of the screen and shoot upwards, destroying aliens. At the time, those games were mainstream and most popular. You had to move quickly, shoot quickly and react immediately. As soon as you try to make those games more realistic, with 3D graphics, they turn out to be slower. We tried to defy the deceleration factor and make space fights more appealing again.
Und den Weltraumkampf im Kern auch wieder attraktiver zu machen.
Weltraum hat...
Space just doesn't have that many options concerning your environment.
When we started making 3D games for cell phones, there was no such thing as 3D acceleration. The detail size was limited to 350 kilobytes. The screen size was 128 by 128 pixels. That's the size of an icon on your iPhone nowadays. Making a 3D game in space therefore is a little easier. All you need is a background, a few 3D objects, and that's it.
Wenn ich in einem Spiel eben auch aus meinem Schiff aussteigen kann und als Pilot dann...
If additionally, I can get out of my spaceship and walk around on other ships or bases, it becomes a totally different game. What remains the same is the space setting and the science fiction surroundings that have always worked.
Und die hat immer funktioniert. Da hat es auch nie eine Abkehr von gegeben.
Und ich bin ganz froh, dass jetzt eigentlich in allen Bereichen was versucht wurde. Ja. Ob jetzt No Man's Sky ist mit sehr...
I'm actually rather glad that many things have been tried. No Man's Sky, for instance, was made with a very detailed scale, which is an incredible achievement from the technical point of view. Or Star Citizen, which at first when I backed it, it was like a wing commander for single players. I hope that's what it's going to be. That's what I'm really looking forward to.
Das ist etwas, worauf ich halt selber auch sehr Bock habe.
Just going to be a pirate. I think what we're talking about here has everything that made Wing Commander great and has everything that made Privateer and Freelancer great. It basically has both things, and the single player sort of military campaign side sits inside this whole universe in a holistic fashion.
Genau, aber jetzt hier ist Deutschland.
In Germany we have Everspace, which has much more of a roguelike approach than we do. Ours only has very little of that aspect.
Chris Roberts has been credited with reviving the space game genre through his incredibly successful crowd-funded Star Citizen campaign. But I think that we also have our fair share by releasing Galaxy on Fire in 2005.
Bis heute ist es auf über 30 Millionen Geräten installiert, also Galaxy on Fire 1 und Galaxy on Fire 2 mit den ganzen Add-ons.
Parts 1 and 2, including all the add-ons, have been installed on over 30 million devices worldwide. We had a gigantic player base. Tens of millions of people played a 3D space game. Galaxy on Fire, the Java version with a size of about 350 kilobytes, was like Wing Commander, only with real 3D animations. We didn't exactly initiate the space game revival, but we did play our part to make it noticeable and enabled players to get back into the supposedly dead genre. What I've always enjoyed most about video games is to be able to dive into other worlds. Wing Commander, Freelancer, and others always gave you the opportunity to explore unknown worlds that someone created. You have to understand the laws, survive, be successful, and above all that, enjoy the scenario. Space is fascinating for people who in general have an affinity for technology and are interested in what's going on out there and what we don't know or haven't found out yet.
Mein erstes Weltraumspiel war selbstverständlich Elite auf dem...
Of course, my first space game was Elite on the C64, and that game did not impress me at all because of the terrible graphics. I couldn't believe how bad they were. What really got me was Wing Commander, the whole series. On the PC, for the first time, great graphics, and you had the impression of sitting in a spaceship and shooting down enemies. I spent a lot of time playing that. But speaking on behalf of the team, I would say that Elite, Wing Commander, and Freelancer are the titles that had a major impact on us. The majority of our team members have been working with us for over 10 years now. So, I guess we're doing more right than wrong, which is nice. It's important that people working for you have to be good in their field of work, and specifically, they have to be better than the person who hires them.
Für den entsprechenden Bereich.
I got into the video game business after taking a few detours. I always wanted to do that, but I was terrible at programming. Assembler code just wasn't made for me. So I studied mechanical engineering and met my business partner, Christian, during the time at the university. For the next 10 years we designed 3D visualizations of architectural models. The tools that we used at the time were game engines. That's pretty much how we got into the gaming scene. In 2004 we made contact to Sony Ericsson through Exit Games. They had just released the first cell phone with the capability of rendering 3D. We saw the potential in 3D games on cell phones.
Gesehen, 3D-Spielen auf dem Handy, da geht was. Wir haben natürlich in 2013 ein sehr...
In 2013 we had a very bad year with our company Fish Labs. So bad that we had to leave even though we didn't want to. On the other hand, because we had to start all over again with Rockfish Games, we were able to start Everspace completely from scratch. We had no attachments, no dead wood, so to speak, and were able to invent everything new and think it all through to improve what we were doing.
Wir konnten auch viele Sachen besser machen, als wir sie vorher gemacht haben.
Special thanks goes out to Chris Roberts. Dear Chris, big thanks also to the fabulous shout out about Everspace to your Star Citizen community. We are flattered that you put us alongside to Star Citizen, Elite Dangerous and No Man's Sky, and we fully agree that each one of it contributes to this amazing renaissance of the genre.
Mit Everspace haben wir angefangen...
In early 2014 we started developing Everspace in the new Rockfish studio, where we want to make PC and console video games. Our first project was a roguelike space shooter. It was the team's idea to combine roguelike gameplay with high-quality graphics. At first I didn't like the idea at all, because in roguelike games you die very often and have to start all over again.
Stirbt man sehr häufig, fängt wieder von vorne an.
I asked myself what's so motivating about that. But after a while I understood. Every time you die you receive experience to invest into your equipment to become better. Then you can come back and win. And we wanted to connect this popular genre with high-quality graphics. That's basically how Everspace was born. And with these projects, you have proven that it is possible to develop great games in Germany despite certain circumstances.
Here are the nominees. And the winner is
Shadow Tactics.
And the winner is, und ich hoffe, ich spreche es richtig aus, The Lion Song von Entwickler Mickey. Herzlichen
To create a game that receives outstanding reviews on all platforms is worth much more than any prize. The prize is for you to pat yourself on the shoulder. That's how it's meant to be, and it's good that way. But what really counts are the sales numbers and a player community that likes your game. That's the greatest prize you can receive.
Das ist eigentlich die größte Auszeichnung, die man bekommen kann. Man sieht es, du spürst es, du spürst als Spieler.
As a player, you can feel if a team made a game with passion and tried to create the best possible game. You cannot plan that, you have to feel it. For this, you have to be a fan of your own game, and I still have fun playing our game every day. When that's the case, you know you have a good product.
Wenn das der Fall ist, dann weißt du auch, du hast ein gutes Produkt.
Ein Roguelike lebt im Prinzip von der...
The base of a roguelike game is character development.
I've been self-employed for 23 years and failed many times.
You start at a very basic level and have to focus on improving yourself.
Du musst schauen, dass du dich immer weiterentwickelst.
Wenn ich jetzt nur eine unserer...
If we hadn't made those supposedly wrong decisions in the past, we wouldn't be where we are at today. I'm sure of that.
Das weiß ich ganz genau.
Tatsächlich ist das Roguelike darauf angelegt.
Roguelike gameplay is designed to have you fail at a certain point. Getting back up and replaying it to show the game whose boss is the motivating element about it.
We can definitely confirm that failure eventually leads to success. You just have to make sure that it doesn't kill you.
Du musst nur dafür sorgen, dass es dich nicht umbringt.
Naja gut, ich meine, wir wissen ja, dass Deutschland als Konsumentenstandort wichtig ist.
We do know that Germany has a major consumer market. But when looking at it in terms of game development, Germany is insignificant. There are only a few studios in Germany that work on an international level.
But there are also many small, cool, and young teams that do a lot of fun stuff, and many great things are happening.
Generally speaking, you have to say that there are very many very talented developers in Germany. Experienced people who develop cool games and have proven their know-how in the past.
Coole Spiele entwickeln, die wissen, wie es geht und die das auch schon gemacht haben in der Vergangenheit.
I think we have to compete through innovations and good quality, and eventually, we'll gradually bring the industry into a better position.
Listen to the communities and find out what the players want and what they like to play. Space games do have a player base, a community. They just haven't been listened to for a long time.
Es hat ihr nur lange niemand zugehört.
I think Germany is great because there's a lot of people there, a lot of talented people. I've always had a positive experience with German developers or fans. So, you know, maybe they're just being nice to me, I don't know.
In the course of this revival with Star Citizen as a pioneering project, a few other very interesting projects emerged within its wake. Amongst others is Everspace and The Long Journey Home.
Everspace und Long Journey Home.
Was mich an Spielen begeistert, ist die Symbiose aus Technik und Kunst. Also ich finde es ganz, ganz spannend. Es gibt kaum
What fascinates me about games is the symbiosis of technology paired with art. There are very few fields where you can work at such a high technological level while at the same time do what motion picture does, using audio and visual images to evoke emotions. It's an easy way to create experiences. And by that, I don't mean storytelling. Telling a story could also be me and my daughter randomly falling into a cave in Minecraft, where we find diamonds which we lose shortly thereafter, get totally furious and try to get back into the cave again. To me, that's also a story told by the game mechanics. I find that so intriguing about games. There isn't any better way to create emotions than to interact in games.
Kein Medium besser als mit Spielen, weil diese Emotionalität, die kriegst du halt nur hin, wenn du damit interagierst. Ich habe mir gerade einen 80er.
I just recently got an 80s arcade machine. I bought an old case, refurbished it, and now I play asteroids and track and field at home with my daughter. Unfortunately, she's leading the high score list again. I think I'll have to tell her that there was a memory error again and erase those high scores.
Es gibt ja auch die Aussage, dass uns das vielleicht von den Tieren ganz viel unterscheidet, dass wir nämlich spielen und durch Spielen.
There is a theory about humans differentiating themselves from animals because we play, and by playing, we found strategies to solve problems. So when you take a look at current education systems, I hope that there will be more influences from learning through entertainment, so that people can learn quickly in an entertaining and in an exciting way. For instance, learning how to solve vector algebra by asking how a spaceship gets from point A to point B, which is basically what it is.
Also ich war halt auch schon so ein bisschen auf der Suche nach, wie kann man nochmal mit einem Team ein schönes Spiel machen.
Well, I did ask myself how to make a good game that we could create with a team. Find Your Way Home was my first note. And then I thought about which scenarios would work for this plot. The funny thing is that initially, this project wasn't set in space. Every developer has a whole list of games that they really enjoyed and always wanted more of. For me, that game was Star Control. I remember it as being incredible and intense. When I took my own list, I ultimately got stuck with a space setting. In that setting, you are somewhere else, somewhere unknown. You have many options and discover new cultures where you yourself feel alien. It just was a fitting idea for our new project. Space as a setting combined everything we wanted. It's not like we said, hey cool, let's make a space game. It was more about what emotions do we want to evoke, and what setting would most likely fit.
Investigation continues into the disappearance of the Daedalus 7 following last month's incident. IASA spokesmen say the Daedalus crew could be anywhere in the galaxy. Damaged, injured, alone. We can only pray that wherever they are, they're holding together.
Ein Freund von mir ist der Kai Rosenkranz, ein recht enger Freund sogar.
Kai Rosenkranz is a friend of mine, a close one even. We were talking one day and he told me about his Kickstarter project and that he's making a soundtrack. But I didn't know what it was about. On the day it was released, it was called Journey Home. And I was like, this can't be real. So I called Kai and said, you called it Journey Home, why? And he told me, well, I'm close to being 40 now, and returning home, where do I belong to and so on. I told him that my working title is called Journey Home and that's just crazy. I then told him that I'm dealing with similar things. Feeling lost can be very exciting on one hand, but on the other it's also kind of scary. We then decided to collaborate and composed a track combined with artwork to make a mood video which we only used internally.
Wir hatten damit verschmolzen, haben so ein Mood-Video gemacht. Das haben wir nur intern verwendet. Man muss trotzdem halt diesen Abstand bewahren, ne? Und man muss halt, ich versuche zum Beispiel.
For me it is important to keep my distance and to make a difference between diving into my work and making decisions concerning the project, and on the other side, trying to look at it as a gamer by playing for a few hours, ignoring the fact that it's my game, and be annoyed by stuff that doesn't work the way it should.
Die nächsten 3 Stunden hin und spiele einfach nur mal so und versuche mal abzuschalten, dass es mein Spiel ist und versuche mich mal darüber zu ärgern, was halt alles nicht funktioniert.
If you manage to do that, I would say it's okay to nerd about your own creations and enjoy them. But at the same time, you have to be able to criticize your work, so that in the end you're not the only person who likes what you did. At least not when you want commercial success.
Das will man, glaube ich, auch nicht. Also nicht, wenn man es kommerziell betreibt. Also verglichen mit allen Projekten, die ich je in meinem Leben gemacht habe.
Compared to all projects that I have ever made, I think that what's so significant about this one is that we had a very emotional and strong vision of what we wanted to do. Especially because of elements like the small spacecraft voyaging through space with a long trail behind it. It's a part of every key artwork in this project. It stands for the vision I talked about earlier. Feeling lost and just wanting to get home. That's what these images are standing for. We consistently stuck to our vision from the beginning and never gave it up during the process. Every prototype, every idea had to do with how we can push it further. And because of that, I think that the game will turn out to be what we had envisioned at the beginning.
Das liefern, was wir am Anfang auch mal gesagt haben.
Right now sci-fi games seem to work. I was told that we're already too late, that sci-fi as a genre is already dead again. Whatever. I think what's most interesting is to make an exciting game.
Dann müssen wir uns einfach auch überlegen, wie schaffen
We have to think about how we can make Germany a more competitive location. France, UK and Scandinavia are good examples of how that can be achieved.
Ländern, dass das geht.
They sure do have a certain advantage on the market.
It's unfair that other countries, even other European countries, receive massive funding.
In anderen Gegenden der Welt da massiv gefördert werden.
The time came and I decided to start Blackbird. But then of course the financial crisis happened in 2008, so it was pretty much the worst time you could choose to start a company, which meant that we were a little delayed getting started. So it was around 2010 that we actually became operational. When we started Blackbird, we began work on our own idea, on our own game, and just by coincidence at that same time, THQ, which was the company that purchased Relic in 2004 and owned the Homeworld property, was going bankrupt. So part of the bankruptcy proceedings at that time involved the Homeworld property, and on Homeworld 1, in 97 to 99, I was the art director and worked together with Aaron Kambitz, who was the lead artist, to develop the look and the feel and the story of Homeworld. So I was like, we got to buy this thing. Eventually it went to Gearbox for $1.35 million, so considerably more than we could afford. Which was a surprise to us because Gearbox are a fantastic developer, but they don't make strategy games. So, you know, I phoned up Randy Pitchford and said, hey, you know, congratulations on this great purchase. I was so excited. It went to a cool developer like you guys, but you know, you make Borderlands and that's great, but it's not a strategy game. You know, why did you buy this thing? And he was like, we don't know, we're just fans and we just don't want someone else to screw it up. And I was like, okay, that's great. You know, what's your plan? And he's like, we don't have a plan. You know, it's like an impulse purchase. You know, maybe you could help us with that plan. You know, and I was like, great. Well, let's meet. So we met and we showed him Shipbreakers. So we made a deal to make it a prequel to Homeworld 1, set on the planet of Karak. and it worked out great. Gearbox were fantastic. It's totally a surprise to be doing this thing again, and the familiarity of the content is so soothing and wonderful. It's like getting into a lovely hot tub. You just, snuggle on in there, and you really know that stuff, and you get to work with the same sound people and the same music people. It's funny, I've played my own games much more than I've played other games. The best is to look at it late, after some time has passed, and watch it again or play it again and be thankful to your past self. Like, oh, good job, past self. That was a great idea, because you forget that you did that. My wish for the future of the gaming industry is that it inspires people beyond simply the short-term satisfaction of input response. We're not curing cancer or healing the sick or feeding the poor or anything here, so we're just making entertainment. That's our business. But I think we can do that and create art at the same time and elevate people and inspire them, I think if developers got emails from people who say things like, when I was 10, I played your game and it changed my life, and I became a writer or an engineer or something, then and I think we're doing a good job.
Also ich persönlich wünsche mir tatsächlich diese alten...
Personally, I would love it if the old story-driven space operas like Wing Commander would come back. Where you get thrown into the plot with a couple of twists and mysteries like in a good story. To get the feeling of being the hero in space. Like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars or the pilots in Battlestar Galactica, just to name a few. I want that back in games.
In Star Wars oder eben an den Piloten in Kampfstar Galactica oder. Das will ich wieder haben bei Spielen.
Und es ist jetzt so, dass natürlich das Jahr von vorne anfängt.
There will be a new year with all the events and of course people asking you about your next Everspace or what other projects there will be. Suddenly publishers are much more open to us, which means that we have to come up with new ideas. What's good is that in space you have many possibilities, and we still have many ideas that we would like to implement in new projects like a new Everspace. There are so many options. But we might just make a different game. I don't know.
Es kann aber auch sein, dass wir ein ganz anderes Spiel machen. Ich weiß es nicht.
Whether it's an independent game that two guys made in their mom's basement over a course of 10 years, which is pretty cool. Or if it's a game that 30, 40 or 50 people made in 2 years with massive funding, doesn't make any difference to the player. The game simply has to be good.
Ist egal, ne? Das Spiel muss halt einfach gut sein.
Wir müssen Leute haben, die eben nicht nur gute Soldaten sind.
We need people who are not only good soldiers that can complete a production mission on a high quality level, but we also need visionaries. The Stanley Kubricks and Orson Welles who are capable of creating new visions.
Die in der Lage sind, wirklich neue Visionen zu schaffen.
It would be good to see good storytelling, good mood and setting, good music. Like, if these things are inspired by incredibly creative and proficient people, combined with the new technology, I think we'll see some really awesome space games in the future.
Angela Merkel visiting Gamescom is definitely a clear signal. The Chancellor of Germany visits the country's biggest games exhibition and declares the games industry as an economical factor and cultural asset. Now we're at a point where gaming is socially much more accepted as a part of everyday life. Of course, that also has to do with the large market of mobile gaming in Germany. People have started to rethink the image of gaming.
Ein Umdenken eingesetzt.
In the game Dreadnought, you slip into the role of spaceship captains who carry out battles against each other. When working on international large-scale projects, we have to compete with the international market. Because of this, it would be helpful to receive funding like in France, the UK or Canada, who have identified the games industry as part of the digital economy and a major growth engine. So we could really use the support.
Natürlich macht's mich froh, wenn sozusagen die Politik.
Of course, I'm happy about politicians getting involved in this industry and that they have identified our need for funding. I'm really looking forward to what the future holds in store for us.
Ganz frohen Mutes sozusagen, was die Zukunft bringen wird.
What I've heard here so far will give us much to think about, especially when you look at what France, the UK and Canada do for their industries. All of us here might have to improve a bit. In this respect, I understood the message. Thank you.
I think it's great how everything is turning out. Especially because of the German indie scene. Germany is not just standing for free-to-play and simulation titles anymore like it was perceived. Now German premium games and pay-to-play titles, which I think stand for high quality, have a good chance for international success. That's a very good development in my opinion.
What I think is so special about Star Citizen is that the presentations are always so fascinating. You're watching, saying, that's never been done before. It's incredible what's technologically possible. But that kind of happens every time now. So I would like to see them finish something for a change.
If you're not supporting the game, you're not making it better, you're not improving it as time goes on, then I think it will actually die, because you have to keep the game relevant, you've got to keep the technology up to date, you've got to add more interesting challenges for your players, and so that's why I view it's never really going to get finished.
At the end of the project A Long Journey Home, I rented a billboard in Wuppertal.
Imagine you have worked on a game for over 2.5 years, which was kind of a soul striptease to me. You're tired, stressed and highly emotional, so you start to isolate yourself. That's the state I was in. And then one morning my daughter sends me a picture of a poster with the question if we're advertising the game, because she hadn't seen the text at the bottom.
Because he simply deserves it. Firstly for the project itself and his personal investment in it.
And I'm looking at this picture, and I'm not even lying. Here it goes again. I'm sitting there in a commuter train, a 42-year-old man, and I'm bawling my eyes out. And I was not embarrassed about it. I thought it was very manly, to be honest.
Aber insbesondere auch für diesen
But especially because I wanted him to know how much I appreciated working with him by dedicating that billboard to him.
Und das ist dann auch mehr wert.
That's worth more than any review or any money involved. Those are the things that shape you and mean the most.
X4 ist für uns so ein Riesending, weil es halt diese ganzen neuen
X4 is a big thing for us, because we're using completely new technologies in it. Besides that, X4 has been our goal for the last decade. Of course, it's not just one game and then we're done. It's basically a whole new series which we will continue to work on a long time after the release. And that'll be more than enough for now.
Weiterarbeiten und das ist erstmal mehr als genug.
I think it's very cool that right now we're in a stage where German studios are successful with space games.
I don't think that the space game genre will fully disappear again. The market works differently now.
Dem Weltraum bleiben wir treu auf jeden Fall.
We're going to stick with space games and there's going to be an Everspace 2, no matter how it'll be called then.
Also wenn es nach unserem Team geht,
If you ask the team, we're going to stay in that same small size, but I don't know how it's going to be in 5 years.
Ich glaube, wir werden weitere Weltraumsimulationen sehen.
I expect that we'll see many new good and passionately made space simulations. But the industry probably won't go in that direction on a large scale like with other genres, so that big publishers like Electronic Arts or Ubisoft or others pick up the trend. But in that case, there are still thousands of other studios that could do that.
Es gibt ja auch noch viele tausende andere Studios, die das auch machen könnten.
3.0 is something we've worked really hard on. I love this genre and I love this world and I sort of see something in my head. Yeah, I kind of feel like the sky's the limit and that's like super exciting for me. I mean, for me, it's the most exciting thing. It's almost like you're getting to build this universe at a level that feels like real and visceral and you go around and I kind of want to exist in this sci-fi universe without limits, basically.